Echoes of the forgotten vow. Shadows of the past. The Sicilian night was a vast, consuming void, stretching endlessly beyond the cliffs where Francesco Mori and Isabella Moreau watched the last embers of the burning estate fade into darkness. The fire had devoured the grand halls, the gilded chandeliers, the whispered deals that had thrived in its shadows. But flames could not erase history, nor could they silence the truth they had uncovered. They had taken the key. They had disrupted a transaction that was meant to reshape the power dynamics of Sicily's underworld. And now the hunt had begun. Mori guided the car along the coastal road, the engine's low hum swallowed by the crashing waves below. Isabella sat beside him, silent, her gaze fixed on the landscape, though her mind was elsewhere, turning over the same questions that lingered between them. The artifact they had stolen was no ordinary relic. It was a key tied to an ancient Sicilian vow, a covenant whispered through generations, protected by those who thrived in secrecy. The parchment had arrived before dawn, slipped beneath the door of their safe house on the outskirts of Palermo. No sender, no indication of who had risked delivering it, but the words, written in an ancient hand, carried the weight of history. Seek the vault beneath Palermo. The past must be reckoned with before it consumes the future. The phrase had settled over him like a storm cloud, thick with unspoken warnings. The vault. It had been dismissed by historians as a myth, a legend spun from half-truths and forgotten records. But if the key existed, then the vault did too. And someone had gone to great lengths to ensure Mori and Isabella were the ones to find it. Their destination was a secluded villa, hidden behind olive groves and stone walls that had stood for centuries. Mori had chosen it for its isolation, its lack of ties to the city's underworld. But even as they arrived, he could feel it, that nagging sensation of unseen eyes watching from the darkness. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and Sicilian citrus. The villa was simple, but secure. Mori wasted no time checking the perimeter, ensuring that they were, at least for the moment, alone. Isabella spread the parchment across the table, running her fingers over the ink, her mind already working to the puzzle it presented. The language was old, predating even the Renaissance, its script belonging to a time when Sicily was ruled by those who held power not only in gold but in blood. Isabella murmured that the vow referenced in the text was older than they had previously believed, bound to a secret that had dictated the rise and fall of families for centuries. The key was not just a relic, it was a claim. Mori listened, his expression unreadable. He had spent his life untangling the webs of deception that ruled men's fates, but this was different. This was personal. The vow, whatever it was, had resurfaced for a reason, and the name attached to it, the name that had been whispered in the archives and the auction house alike, was one he could never escape. Mori. His own bloodline was woven into this mystery, stitched into a past he had spent years trying to outrun. And now, someone was trying to draw him back in. A noise outside shattered the stillness. Subtle, almost imperceptible. But Mori had spent a lifetime attuned to such things. He moved swiftly, pressing a hand to Isabella's arm in silent warning before slipping toward the window. A shadow moved beyond the olive trees. A figure standing just beyond the reach of the villa's light, watching. Mori's grip tightened around the pistol at his side. The past was no longer waiting. It had already found him. The lost archives. The shadow outside the villa had not lingered. By the time Mori reached the edge of the olive grove, the intruder had vanished into the Sicilian night, leaving behind no tracks, no sign of passage, only the undeniable certainty that they were being watched. Mori returned to the villa to find Isabella still studying the parchment, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had managed to decipher more of the text, connecting the vowel's origins to an obscure brotherhood that had existed in Sicily for centuries, an order sworn to guard secrets that could alter the balance of power. One name stood out: San Bartolomeo, a monastery abandoned for decades, hidden in the hills outside Palermo. Once a place of worship, it had long since fallen into ruin, its archives sealed away, forgotten by time. If there was any record of the vault, of the key's true purpose, it would be there. They moved before dawn, their journey taking them through winding mountain roads, the morning mist clinging to the landscape like a ghost of the past. The monastery revealed itself in fragments. First, the crumbling bell tower piercing the sky, then the weathered stone walls covered in creeping ivy. Time had worn it down, but its presence remained formidable, an echo of something that refused to be erased. The entrance had long since collapsed, forcing them to scale the side wall, finding a path through the remnants of a courtyard once filled with prayers and whispered confessions. The silence was absolute, thick with the weight of what had been left behind. Inside, the air was damp, carrying the scent of old parchment and decay. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books whose pages had turned brittle with age. The archives were hidden beyond a collapsed corridor, their door locked with mechanism far too intricate for a simple place of faith. Isabella worked quickly, her hands tracing the worn symbols carved into stone. The design was ancient, its craftsmanship far too deliberate for a mere monastery. The Brotherhood had concealed something here, something they had not wished the world to find. After a tense moment, the mechanism gave way, the heavy door groaning as it opened to reveal the archive beyond. The chamber was small, but untouched by time. Shelves lined the walls, filled with scrolls and manuscripts, their ink faded but still legible. At the center of the room lay a single pedestal, upon which rested a bound volume, its cover bearing the same crest as the key Mori carried. Isabella turned the fragile pages with care, reading aloud fragments of what was written. The words spoken, oaths sworn in blood, of a vault hidden beneath Palermo, where the fate of Sicily had once been decided. The key was not merely a symbol. It was proof of succession, a right to something long forgotten but never truly lost. Mori's pulse remained steady, but he understood the weight of what they had uncovered. This was no simple artifact, no mere relic of history. This was a claim, a seat at a table that had shaped the underworld for centuries. Before he could speak, a noise cut through the silence. Not the wind, not the settling of stone. Footsteps. They were not alone. The realization came too late. The moment Mori turned, shadows moved in the doorway, figures emerging from the darkness. The archive had not been forgotten. It had been watched. A trap had been waiting, and they had walked straight into it. Dangerous alliances. The realization struck like a blade. They were not alone. Francesco Mori's instincts, honed by years of surviving in the underworld shadows, registered the presence of intruders even before he saw them. The air shifted, the faintest creak of leather, the scent of damp wool and gunmetal, the controlled breathing of men accustomed to waiting in silence. The passage behind them had been blocked. For figures stepped into the archive's dim candlelight, their presence a carefully orchestrated ambush. Their leader, standing just within the doorway, had the deliberate confidence of a man who knew he was in control. Mori didn't need to hear a name to recognize the allegiance. Vittorio Leone had sent them. The Leone family had ruled parts of Palermo's underworld for generations, their influence stretching from the docks to the private halls where real power changed hands. Vittorio himself was a different breed from the usual crime lords, elegant, calculated, and burdened by neither haste nor conscience. He did not move against a rival, unless the game had already been won before the first move was played. Mori knew that Leone had allowed them to get this far for a reason. This was no random assault. This was a message. Isabella exhaled slowly, her fingers still poised on a fragile manuscript she had been reading. She knew better than to react in panic. She met Mori's gaze for the briefest second, silent acknowledgement, a question left unspoken. He gave the smallest nod in return. Wait. Watch. See how this unfolds. The leader of the intruders took a measured step forward. The flickering candlelight revealed a face carved by experience. Deep-set eyes, a scar tracing along his jawline, a mouth set in the calm neutrality of a man who did not need to threaten in order to be obeyed. Without speaking, he held out a small envelope, expensive parchment, the kind used only by men who played in the highest circles. Mori took it without hesitation, breaking the wax seal. The message inside was written in a careful, almost artistic hand. We need to talk. No more shadows. No more games. Come alone. The signature beneath it was unmistakable. Vittorio Leone. Mori exhaled. Vittorio rarely invited a conversation when a bullet would suffice. That alone made this meeting far more dangerous than any ambush. Without a word, the intruders turned and left, dissolving into darkness as silently as they had arrived. A warning, nothing more. For now, the meeting was set for the following night. A private club deep in Palermo, where the old guard still ruled from velvet-lined booths, whispering agreements that shaped the city's future. Mori had known such places well in his youth, before he had walked away from the world that had carved his name in blood. He arrived alone as instructed. The club was exactly as he remembered, dimly lit, thick with the scent of cigars and aged whiskey, filled with men who spoke in riddles rather than declarations. These were not petty criminals. These were the architects of power, the ones who had learned that a well-placed favor held far more weight than brute force. Vittorio waited in the back, a glass of brandy untouched before him. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes carried the weight of unspoken truths. He did not waste time on pleasantries. He spoke of the vault, of the key, of the vow that Mori had stumbled into. He spoke of the past, not just Sicily's, but Mori's own. The vow was not merely a legend. It was a contract, binding families into an unspoken agreement that had shaped the balance of power for centuries. The vault beneath Palermo contained more than just gold or artifacts. It held the true history of Sicily's rulers, the records of alliances and betrayals that had dictated the fates of men for generations. And Mori, whether he had chosen it or not, was now a part of it. Vittorio leaned back, watching him carefully, then offered his proposal. He would help Mori and Isabella find the vault. He had the contacts, the resources, the knowledge of its defenses. But in return, Mori would owe him, not money, not land, something far more binding, a favor, to be called upon at a time of Vittorio's choosing. No explanations, no negotiations, just a debt written in blood and silence. Mori understood the weight of such an agreement. A favor owed to Vittorio Leone was not a mere transaction. It was a chain linking him back to a world he had spent his life escaping. But he also knew that without Vittorio's help, the vault would remain hidden. The forces moving against them would not allow them to reach it on their own. He looked at the man across from him, the past reflected in his calculating eyes. There was no choice. Mori extended his hand. Vittorio smiled. The pact was sealed. The descent begins. By the time Mori returned to Isabella, the city had grown quiet. He told her what had transpired, watching as she processed the reality of the path they had now chosen. She was not naive. She knew that accepting Vittorio's help meant walking into a world that would demand something in return. But she also understood the necessity. They had taken the first step. There was no turning back. The vault was real, and now they had the means to reach it. But as Mori stood by the villa's window, staring into the endless Sicilian night, He could not shake the feeling that something was already in motion. Something far older, far deadlier than even Vittorio Leone's ambitions. The past was awakening, and it would not rest until its secrets were laid bare. Beneath the surface, the entrance of the vault lay somewhere beneath Palermo, hidden beneath centuries of deception, forgotten by all but those who still whispered of its existence. Mori and Isabella now had the key, the map, and, most dangerously, the backing of Vittorio Leone. The underworld did not give without expecting something in return. Mori knew that, and yet, as he stood before the ancient catacombs deep beneath the city, he also knew that there had never truly been a choice. The descent, the tunnels stretched beneath Palermo like veins beneath flesh, dark, winding, filled with echoes of a past that refused to die. What had once been a burial ground for monks had since become a labyrinth of passageways, known only to those who had something to hide. Vittorio's men had cleared the way, providing a path through what had once been impassable ruins. But there was no mistaking the fact that this was no ordinary excavation. The stonework was too deliberate, the symbols carved into the walls too precise. This place had been built with intent. Isabella moved ahead, her flashlight illuminating the intricate engravings along the walls. Symbols of an ancient order, their meanings long buried by time. She traced her fingers over the stone, murmuring that these markings were not merely decorative. They were warnings. They were walking into something far older than they had imagined, the vault's guardian. The final door was unlike anything else in the catacombs. A massive slab of stone, its surface covered in symbols that had been worn by centuries but still carried undeniable meaning. At its center, a circular indentation, an exact match to the key they had taken from this state. Mori hesitated. Something about this was wrong. The weight in the air, the silence pressing around them. This was not merely an entrance. It was a threshold. As Isabella fitted the key into place, the mechanism groaned, ancient gears shifting for the first time in centuries. The door shuddered, then slowly began to open. Beyond it, a single figure stood in the darkness. An old man, draped in the robes of a forgotten order. His face was lined with time, his expression unreadable, his posture unwavering. He had been waiting, not for them, for someone like them. His voice was steady, measured, as he spoke in Sicilian older than either of them had ever heard. He had been the guardian of this vault, as his father had been before him, and his father before that. For generations, his family had protected the knowledge held within. And now, he asked Mori a question that cut through the weight of the moment. Did he come as a seeker of truth, or as an heir to power? Mori said nothing at first. He understood the weight of those words, the implications hidden beneath them. To claim the vault was to claim its legacy. To open it was to inherit the burdens of those who had come before. Isabella watched him carefully, waiting for his answer. Mori finally spoke. He did not seek to rule, nor did he wish to inherit the sins of his ancestors. He had come because the vow had resurfaced, because history had refused to stay buried. If the vault held the truth, then it was time for it to be known. The guardian studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly he stepped aside. The vault was open, and whatever lay within would change everything. The guardian's secret. The air inside the vault was thick with the weight of time, undisturbed for centuries. The flickering torchlight cast elongated shadows across the stone walls, illuminating rows of ancient manuscripts, scrolls, and ledgers bound in cracked leather. This was no mere repository of wealth. This was a treasury of knowledge, a silent witness to the power struggles that had shaped Sicily's fate for generations. Francesco Mori and Isabella Moreau stepped forward cautiously, their senses sharpened by the awareness that this place had been protected for a reason. The old guardian, standing just beyond the threshold, watched them with the patience of a man who had long known this moment would come. He spoke in the dialect of Sicily's oldest families, his words measured, deliberate. The vault was not merely a storage of secrets. It was a foundation of an ancient order, one that had ruled not through titles or armies, but through the control of knowledge itself. Every betrayal, every alliance, every decision that had shaped the island's power structure had been recorded here. The vow that had bound families like the Moris and Leones was not just a pledge of loyalty. It was a contract, sealed in blood, ensuring that those who held the secrets of this place would never lose their grip on the world above. Mori understood the implications immediately. The key he had recovered was not just a symbol of access. It was a claim to leadership. He was not merely uncovering history. He was inheriting it. The cost of truth. Isabella moved toward one of the ledgers, carefully opening its brittle pages. What she found inside made her breath catch. The names listed were not just those of ancient rulers and long-dead nobles. They were modern, businessmen, politicians, judges, names that still held power in the present day. The network that had controlled Sicily's fate had never been truly dismantled. It had merely adapted, shifting through generations, ensuring its survival. Mori felt the weight of his family name pressing against him like a vice. His ancestors had been part of this, architects of the very power structures he had spent his life resisting. He had built his career exposing corruption, dismantling criminal enterprises. But now he stood at the heart of something that had never needed the violence of the streets. This was a different kind of control, one that ruled not through fear, but through inevitability. The guardian watched him carefully, his next words carrying the final piece of the puzzle. There had been a betrayal. Centuries ago, one of the families entrusted with a vow had sought to break it, to use the vault's knowledge for personal gain rather than for balance. That betrayal had nearly destroyed the order, forcing it into the shadows, erasing its name from history. The vow had survived, but only barely. And now, that same betrayal had resurfaced. Someone had been searching for the vault long before Mori and Isabella. The attempts on Valentino Orsini, the coded messages, the auction, all of it had been part of a larger scheme to reclaim control over what had been lost. Mori had not been the first to uncover these secrets. He had simply been the first to survive, the true enemy. Isabella turned to Mori, her expression grave. If the names in these ledgers were revealed, Sicily's entire power structure would crumble. But if they remained hidden, the cycle of control would continue, unbroken, ensuring that history repeated itself in silence. The guardian stepped forward one last time, his gaze locked onto Mori's. The choice was his now. He could claim the vow, take his place as its keeper, and wield its power as his ancestors once had. Or he could burn it all to the ground, dismantling the system that had dictated Sicily's fate for centuries. But before Mori could answer, a sound echoed through the vault, distant footsteps, the metallic click of a weapon being drawn. They had not come alone. The enemy was already here. Legacy of blood. The air inside the vault shifted. The silence, once heavy with history, now carried something far more immediate. A threat unseen but unmistakable. Footsteps echoed through the chamber, deliberate and slow, the sound of men who knew they had already won. Francesco Mori and Isabella Moreau exchanged a glance. No words were needed. They had been followed. The old guardian remained motionless, his weathered face betraying no surprise. He had expected this. Perhaps he had always known that the vault's final secret would not be claimed without blood. Then, from the darkness, a voice emerged. Vittorio Leone stepped forward, his presence filling the chamber with the quiet certainty of a man who had already counted his victory. He carried no weapon in hand. He did not need one. His men flanked him, guns drawn, forming a silent perimeter around Mori and Isabella. Vittorio's gaze swept over the vault's treasures, the ledgers filled with names, the records of an invisible empire that had ruled Sicily from the shadows for generations. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, satisfaction, perhaps, or inevitability. He spoke with the ease of a man who had orchestrated every step of this game. He had known about the vault long before Mori. He had known that the key existed, that the vow was more than legend. And now, he had let Mori do the work for him. The truth was simple. Vittorio did not want to destroy the vow. He wanted to claim it, a test of loyalties. Mori remained still, his mind working through the implications. Vittorio's move had been perfect, ruthless in its patience. He had given Mori just enough information to make him search, guiding him toward the vault, allowing him to unlock the door that had remained sealed for centuries. And now that the secrets lay bare, Vittorio had come to take them for himself. Isabella's hands clenched at her sides, her breath controlled but sharp. She had trusted Mori to stand on the side of justice. But now, she could see the trap Vittorio had laid. The offer came next, as Mori knew it would. Vittorio did not need to threaten him. He simply reminded Mori of what the vault represented. Power, legacy, control. The names written in these ledgers dictated the future of Sicily. To hold them was to hold the island in his grasp. Vittorio did not need to fight Mori. He needed him to choose. Would he destroy his family's past? Or would he take his place within it? The silence stretched. The old guardian watched Mori with quiet understanding. He had seen this moment before. 100 years ago, 100 times over. The same choice. The same weight. The choice. Mori exhaled slowly. Then, without hesitation, he moved, not toward Vittorio, but toward the nearest shelf, his hand closing around one of the ancient ledgers. And then he threw it into the open flame of the torch beside him. The reaction was immediate. The dry pages caught fire in an instant, the ink curling into ash, erasing names that had dictated the fate of Sicily for generations. Vittorio's calm expression faltered for the first time, his body shifting forward. Not in fear, not in anger, but in the realization that the game had slipped from his grasp. Before his men could react, Mori moved again, knocking over another shelf, sending more books tumbling into the fire. The room erupted into motion. Gunfire, shouts, the crackling of flames devouring history. Isabella seized her chance, drawing the pistol hidden at her side. A single shot rang out, not meant to kill, but to create chaos. In confusion, Mori turned to the old guardian. Their eyes met. Understanding passed between them in an instant. The vault would not be claimed. It would be erased. The old man moved swiftly, pressing his hand against the stone wall behind him. A deep rumbling filled the chamber. Mechanisms, ancient but still functional, groaned into motion. The vault was collapsing. Mori seized Isabella's wrist, pulling her toward the only escape route. Behind them, Vittorio shouted orders, but it was too late. The fire spread. The ground trembled, stone crumbling from the ceiling as the vault sealed itself shut once more, this time forever. The aftermath. They emerged into the catacombs just as the last of the vault caved in behind them. The ancient records, the names, the knowledge that had shaped Sicily's power for centuries. All gone. Vittorio had survived. Mori had no doubt of that. A man like him always found a way. But he had lost the one thing he had spent his life trying to claim. Mori and Isabella did not speak as they climbed back into the Sicilian night. The stars above were unchanged, oblivious of the war that had just been fought in the shadows. The vow was gone. The past had been buried once more. But the future? The future was unwritten.